Buy some dignity, sweetheart. He threw the money at her feet, bills fluttering to the dirty concrete. Every single person at that gas station went completely silent. And Emily Hayes, she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just looked down at those bills on the ground, then slowly looked back up at him. She took out her phone. She photographed his license plate. Then she drove away. What Ryan Mitchell didn't know, what none of those silent bystanders knew, was exactly who was waiting for Emily Hayes at home. And by the end of this story, neither will you forget it. The afternoon heat in Tucson, Arizona hit different in late July. It wasn't the kind of heat that made people uncomfortable. It was the kind of heat that made people mean. The kind that sat heavy on your skin and pressed down on your patience until whatever civility you'd been carrying around all day started sweating right out of you. Emily Hayes had worked a full shift. Not at some glamorous office, not at a place with climate control and catered lunches and coworkers who asked about your weekend. She worked at a distribution warehouse on the eastern edge of the city, the kind of job that asked everything from your body and gave back just enough to keep going. 12 hours, steel-toed boots, a back that ached by noon and screamed by quitting time. But she didn't complain. That wasn't who Emily was. She was 32 years old, though most people guessed younger when they first met her. Not because she had the look of someone who hadn't lived, but because she carried herself with a kind of quiet steadiness that people sometimes mistook for naivety. She had light brown hair, she usually kept pulled back pale blue eyes, and the kind of face that was honest before it was pretty. No pretense, no performance. Just a woman who showed up, did what needed doing, and drove home. That evening, she was driving her blue pickup truck west on Route 10, the same route she took every single evening when the low fuel warning light blinked on. She sighed. She hadn't had time to fill up that morning. She'd been running late after Michael called from the road. She took the next exit and pulled into the Desert Cross gas station, an older place, the kind with faded signage and pumps that sometimes required a second swipe. She'd stopped here before. Nothing fancy, nothing wrong with it either, just a gas station. She pulled up to pump 7, got out, stretched her back, slid her debit card into the reader. The machine beeped twice. Card declined, please try again or see attendant. She frowned. She tried again. Same result. She wasn't panicked. This had happened before. Sometimes the magnetic strip on her card acted up after being kept too close to her phone. She pulled out her phone to check her banking app, wanting to confirm the balance before going inside. That was when the black Escalade pulled in behind her, not next to her, behind her, closer than necessary. The vehicle was immaculate. Tinted windows, custom rims, one of those cars that announced its owner's income before the door even opened. And when the door did open, Ryan Mitchell stepped out like a man who'd never once in his life been asked to wait for anything. He was 51 years old, 6 feet even, silver hair expensively cut. He wore a pale blue dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, casual, but the kind of casual that cost $800. His watch caught the sun. He looked at the pump. He looked at Emily. He looked at his watch. "Excuse me," he said. Emily glanced up from her phone. "I'm sorry, I'll just be a second. My card's giving me trouble." "Yeah." He said it the way people say words when they've already decided words are wasted on you. "I can see that." He walked to the pump beside hers and swiped his own card. It went through immediately. He didn't look at her again. But his energy, that particular brand of impatience that wealthy people sometimes wear like cologne, filled the space between them. Emily went back to her phone. Her balance was fine. The issue was the card reader, not her account. She started walking toward the station attendant's booth. "Where are you going?" Ryan asked. She stopped, turned around, inside, to pay cash. The card reader's broken on this pump. He looked at his watch again, then at her truck, then at her work clothes, the faded navy blue shirt with the warehouse logo, the worn jeans, the scuffed boots. His eyes moved over her the way people scan a parking lot for their car. Not really looking, just assessing, and finding nothing worth his attention. "This is the second time this week this pump's been out," he said, speaking not to her, but to the general air, loud enough for the 3 or 4 other people nearby to hear. "I swear they keep letting anyone run these places." A couple of people near the adjacent pumps glanced over. Emily kept walking. She wasn't going to engage. She was tired. She just wanted key and to go home. "Hey," his voice sharpened, How long is this going to take? I've got somewhere to be. She turned again, slowly. Sir, I'm going inside right now. It'll take 2 minutes. 2 minutes? He laughed, not the kind of laugh that had any warmth in it. 2 minutes. Do you have any idea what 2 minutes costs someone like me? I genuinely don't, Emily said, and I'm not sure it's relevant. Something shifted in his expression then. Not anger exactly, more like surprise. He wasn't used to pushback from people who looked like her, didn't fit whatever script was running in his head. He stepped slightly closer. You're blocking the pump. I was here first. And you can't figure out how to use a credit card. A man near pump 4 made a quiet sound, not quite a laugh, not quite discomfort. One of those sounds people make when they sense something escalating and aren't sure which way to lean. Emily turned and kept walking toward the booth. She told herself, 2 minutes. Get the cash. Get the gas. Go home. Don't give this man another second of your energy. She was 3 steps away when she heard him say loudly, clearly intended for the whole parking lot, I guess not everyone can afford to drive a car that doesn't break down. She stopped. She heard a woman somewhere near pump 2 make a quick intake of breath. Emily stood still for a moment. Her jaw tightened. She thought of Michael. She thought of what he always said. Real strength isn't what you do when people push you. It's what you choose not to do. She turned around one more time. My car runs fine, she said quietly. Your patience seems to be the one breaking down. That was when everything changed. Ryan Mitchell's face went cold. Not hot cold, controlled. The way people get when they're used to exercising power in very specific ways. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his money clip, gold edge thick, and peeled off several bills. He didn't hand them to her. He held them out, then let them fall. Deliberately, one by one, fluttering down to the dirty concrete between them. There, he said, buy some dignity, sweetheart, and get out of everyone's way. Silence, total silence. Not a pump handle moved, not a car door opened. Everyone in that small, ordinary parking lot froze. Emily looked down at the money on the ground. She looked up at him. She did not bend down to pick it up. She said nothing. She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds, long enough that he shifted his weight just barely, just enough that it was visible, and then she walked to the attendant booth, paid cash for her gas, filled her tank, got in her truck and drove away. She did not cry until she reached the highway, and even then she kept both hands on the wheel, because she'd learned over years of hard living that you can fall apart and still stay in your lane. But before she left that parking lot, she did one thing. She took out her phone. She photographed his license plate. She didn't know why exactly. Something in her gut. Something that said, remember this. She remembered it. The drive home took 45 minutes. For the first 15, Emily was completely silent. Just the road, just the wind coming through the cracked window. The radio off, her hands tapping a slow, unconscious rhythm on the steering wheel, the way they did when she was working something out in her head. By the 20-minute mark, she had almost convinced herself it was nothing. People said ugly things, rich people especially. Ryan Mitchell was a stranger, a rude stranger having a bad day probably, or more likely just a man who'd never had anyone hold up a mirror. She'd survived worse. She'd moved through this world long enough to know that cruelty from strangers was not a referendum on your worth. She knew that. Michael had taught her that the hard way over years. But by the 30-minute mark, something else had started creeping in. Something quieter and more persistent than anger. It was the faces of the people standing around that parking lot who had said absolutely nothing. The man near pump 4 who'd made that small sound and then looked away. The woman near pump 2 whose breath had hitched but who had turned back to her car window. The teenage attendant inside the booth who'd taken Emily's $20 bill and kept his eyes down. Nobody said a word. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody even made eye contact with her afterward, as if acknowledging what had happened would cost them something they weren't willing to spend. And that, Emily realized as she took the county road toward home, was the part that actually hurt. Not Ryan Mitchell's words. She'd heard uglier, not the money on the ground. She'd been humiliated before by people with less excuse. It was the silence of the witnesses. It was the particular loneliness of being made small in front of other people and having every single one of them decide quietly and privately that it was easier not to notice. She pulled into the long gravel driveway. The lights were on. Michael was home. The clubhouse sat off a county road about 12 miles outside of Tucson proper. From the outside, it didn't look like much, a long, low building with a gravel lot, a flag, a couple of old bikes lined up near the entrance, some light coming through the windows. Practical, not trying to impress anyone. But to Emily, it had always felt like home, the first home she'd had in a long time. She'd met Michael Hayes 8 years ago at a fundraiser for burn victims. One of the quiet charitable events his chapter organized every year that never made the news, because that wasn't the point. She'd been volunteering, he'd been grilling, and she'd made some offhand comment about how he was handling the tongs all wrong, and he'd handed them to her without a word, with this expression on his face that was completely unreadable. And she'd spent the next 6 months trying to figure out what it meant. Eventually, she figured out it meant, I'm paying attention. I always pay attention. That was Michael. I was 51 now, 6'2", built the way men get built when they've done physical work all their lives, not sculpted, just solid, like something that's been tested and hasn't broken. His hair had gone mostly silver over the past couple of years, which he wore without vanity or complaint. He had the kind of face that didn't give much away to strangers, but Emily had learned to read it the way you learn to read weather, by the small signs, the things that shifted before the storm. She pushed open the front door. He was in the kitchen reading something at the table with a cup of coffee going cold beside him. He looked up when she walked in. One look. That was all it took. What happened? He said, not alarmed, just certain, because in 8 years he'd learned her face too. Nothing, she said automatically. He put the paper down. Emily. She stood in the doorway. She was still wearing her work boots. She hadn't even taken her jacket off. And standing there in her own kitchen, in the quiet of a home she had built with a man she trusted, the thing she'd been holding for 45 minutes on the highway started to loosen. I stopped for gas, she said. My car didn't work. And there was a man. She stopped, started again. There was a man who he threw money at me, Michael, in front of everyone. He called me. She paused. Her voice was steady, completely steady. That almost made it worse. He called me a charity case and told me to buy some dignity. Michael Hayes did not move. He sat very still for a long moment. His coffee cup was in front of him. His hands were flat on the table. His face was completely composed. Then he asked, did he put his hands on you? No. Did he threaten you? No, just... She spread her hands slightly. Words, money on the ground, the whole thing, in front of probably 10 or 12 people. And nobody said anything. It wasn't a question. She shook her head. He was quiet for a moment. Then, did you get his plate? She almost smiled, because of course that was the next question. Because that was Michael. Not rage, not volume, just what do we know? I photographed it, she said, before I left. He nodded slowly. Send it to me. She pulled out her phone, sent it. He looked at the image for exactly 4 seconds. Then he set his phone face down on the table and looked at her. Come sit down, he said. Michael, it's fine. I don't want you to... I'm not going to do anything, he said. Come sit down. She sat. He poured her a glass of water, set it in front of her, sat back down across the table, and he looked at her the way he always looked at her when something mattered, like he was reading every word she wasn't saying. Did he think, Michael said slowly, that nobody was standing beside you? Emily felt the air go out of her lungs. It wasn't a complicated question. It wasn't even that dramatic, a sentence the way he said it. Quiet, almost conversational. But it landed somewhere deep because it named exactly what had happened. Ryan Mitchell had looked at Emily Hayes standing alone at that pump in her work clothes with her card that wouldn't read, and he had made a calculation. He had decided she was powerless. He had decided she was undefended. He had decided that the cost of cruelty was zero. I think that's exactly what he thought, she said. Michael nodded once. Then he made a mistake, he said, and he's going to find that out. She woke up the next morning to find Michael's side of the bed empty. This wasn't unusual. Michael kept early hours. But when she came into the kitchen, there were 3 men she recognized sitting around the table with him. Big Lou, a man the size of a refrigerator, who ran the chapter's finances with extraordinary precision. Danny Cross, who was ex-military and now handled logistics for the chapter. And a quieter man everyone called Rook, whose skill set Emily had never fully understood, but whose presence at any table meant something serious was being discussed. 4 cups of coffee, maps open on 2 laptops, a printed photograph of a black Escalade, Emily stopped in the doorway. Michael looked up at her. Morning. Morning, she said carefully. Should I ask Ryan Mitchell, Michael said. Real estate developer. Closed a $14 million commercial property deal in Phoenix 3 days ago. Has a business dinner tonight at a private event at the Sterling House restaurant in downtown Phoenix. Celebrating with investors, about 40 people. Emily stared at him. You found all of that since last night. Lou's efficient, Michael said simply. Lou across the table didn't look up from his laptop, but lifted his coffee cup in a kind of acknowledgement. Michael. Emily came into the kitchen. She stood beside the table. What are you planning? Nothing illegal, he said. That doesn't answer my question. He looked up at her directly. I made you a promise last night. You remember what I said? She remembered. He's going to find that out. I said I wouldn't hurt him, Michael said. And I won't. No threats, no violence. Nothing that could come back on you or on this chapter. He paused. But that man stood in a public parking lot in front of witnesses and treated my wife like she was invisible. And he did it because he was certain there would be no consequence. He stood up from the table. I'm going to make sure there's a consequence. Emily looked at the four men around the table, at the laptops and the notes and the photograph of the license plate she'd taken. At the quiet, organized, methodical energy in the room, nothing like the explosiveness that outsiders always imagine when they thought about men like these. Just careful, serious attention being paid. He's going to be surrounded by the most important people in his career, Emily said slowly. You'd be walking into that. Yes, Michael said. People are going to have a certain impression when you walk in. I know. And that doesn't concern you. Michael picked up his coffee. The impression people have of us, he said, tends to be pretty effective. She looked at him for a long moment. I don't want anyone to get hurt. Nobody will. And I don't want this to make things worse for the chapter. It won't. He set his cup down. Emily, I need you to trust me. She did. That was the honest answer. After 8 years, trust wasn't something she extended to Michael, it was something she'd built with him, brick by brick, through harder situations than this. And she knew deep in her gut that whatever Michael Hayes was planning, it wasn't impulsive, it wasn't emotional, it was something else entirely. She exhaled. What time tonight? She asked. He looked up slightly surprised. You're coming, she said. It wasn't a question. Of course you're coming, he said. You're the one he disrespected. You're the one who has to look him in the eye. She nodded. She pulled out a chair and sat down at the table. Okay, she said. Then show me what we know. By noon, they knew everything that mattered. Ryan Mitchell, age 51. Born in Scottsdale, raised in money, educated expensively. He had built his real estate development firm over 20 years through a combination of genuine skill, aggressive negotiation, and from the accounts of at least a dozen former employees and business associates, a particular talent for making people beneath him feel small. This last part wasn't in any public record. It was assembled from conversations. Lou had made calls. Rook had made different kinds of calls. Danny had found forum threads, court filings, one civil complaint that had been settled quietly. The pattern was there clear as a road. Ryan Mitchell did not pick on equals. He picked on people he believed couldn't fight back. Vendors, assistants, service workers, anyone in a position of dependency or apparent powerlessness. He had been complained about by contractors who owed him future business. He had been reported to HR 3 times at his own company complaints that had been, according to one former employee who Danny reached by phone, managed internally. He had never apparently faced any real consequence. Because he's careful, Rook said, leaning back in his chair. He does it in public, but never quite publicly enough. Service industry settings, parking lots, places where the people around him either don't have standing or don't want trouble. Until yesterday, Big Lou said. Until yesterday, Michael agreed. Emily was reading through a series of text messages on Rook's phone messages from a former events coordinator who had worked one of Ryan's company dinners 2 years prior and had an experience that made Emily's stomach tighten. The woman's name was Kara. She'd been publicly berated in front of 40 guests for a table placement error. She'd kept her job only because she'd needed the income. She'd filed nothing. She'd said nothing. And when Rook had called her that morning, her first words had been, "Is something finally happening?" Emily set the phone down. She looked at Michael. "This isn't just about me," she said. "No," he agreed. "It hasn't been for a few hours now. She was quiet for a moment, then, "Are the other coming tonight?" "I've been making calls," Michael said. "Some of them want to. I told them they could if they were willing to let me lead. And they agreed to that." He gave her a look. "They know me." She nodded slowly. "Then I think Emily said, we need to bring Kara." Michael studied her. "She won't want to," Emily said. "She'll be scared. She hasn't said anything in 2 years. But she's going to want to know someone finally showed up. And I think when she sees that we're actually doing this." She stopped, steadied herself. "She shouldn't be alone in this either." Michael was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and handed it across the table to her. "You call her," he said. Emily took the phone. She dialed. It rang 4 times. "Hello," a woman's voice, careful and certain. "Kara," Emily said. "My name is Emily Hayes. I don't think we've met, but I think we've both had the same conversation with the same man. And tonight, if you're willing, you won't have to stand alone in it anymore." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Kara said, "Where do I meet you?" "Imam." The afternoon moved fast after that. There were details, logistics, the kind of careful preparation that Michael approached the same way he approached everything systematically, without wasted motion, without ego. He wasn't angry, he was organized. And in Emily's experience, organized was far more dangerous than angry. She called 3 other people by 4 o'clock. A former parking attendant named Jerome, who'd been publicly berated by Ryan at a hotel garage 2 years ago and still carried the memory like a stone in his chest. A young woman named Priya, who'd been a junior associate at one of Ryan's partner firms and had been humiliated in a client meeting for asking a question he deemed beneath his time. And a restaurant manager named Gerald, 60 years old, who'd had cash thrown at him at a charity dinner when Ryan felt the service was slow. All 4 of them said yes. None of them had been planning to. But something about Emily's voice, or maybe something about the fact that someone had finally called, made the answer easy. Michael listened to each call without comment, but after the 4th one, when Emily set the phone down on the kitchen table and rubbed her eyes, he reached across and covered her hand with his for a moment. "You didn't expect this many," he said. "No," she said. "Did you?" "Oh, I hoped for it." She looked at him. "What does that mean?" He was quiet for a moment. "It means that men like Ryan Mitchell don't stop. They keep going until someone stops them. And the only reason nobody has is because everyone he's done this to has believed they were alone." He paused. They weren't alone. They just didn't know it yet. Emily thought about that parking lot, about the 10 or 12 people standing in silence, about that silence being in its own way a kind of permission. "Tonight," she said, "we take the permission away." Michael looked at her steadily. "Tonight," he said, "we show him who was actually standing beside you all along." She changed clothes before they left. Not into anything extravagant. Emily Hayes had never been the kind of woman who dressed for other people. But she put on clean dark jeans, a crisp white shirt, her good boots. She pulled her hair down for once. She looked in the bathroom mirror for a long moment. The woman looking back at her was not the woman who had stood at Pump 7 12 hours ago. Not because she'd changed, but because she finally looked like herself, not the version that Ryan Mitchell had tried to reduce her to. Not the woman in worn clothes with a card that wouldn't read and no one standing beside her. She looked like a woman who knew exactly who was walking in behind her. She heard bikes starting in the driveway. She heard Michael's voice outside, low, steady, giving direction. She couldn't make out the words through the window, but she knew the tone. That was the voice he used when something mattered, when he expected everyone around him to be precise. She heard other engines joining his. One, then another, then more. She didn't count. She just walked outside. The driveway was full. She'd known some of them would come. She hadn't known how many. There were 23 men and women standing in that gravel lot, mounted up and ready, all of them looking at her with a kind of steady, quiet gravity that made her throat tighten. These were people who had known her for years, who had watched her work alongside Michael in this community, who had eaten at her table and sat with her through hard years and easy ones. And every single one of them had made a choice tonight. They were coming, not because Michael told them to, because she was one of theirs. She walked to Michael. He was standing beside his bike, already in his cut, waiting. "Ready?" he asked. She looked at the assembled group. She thought of Kara, who was driving to meet them, of Jerome and Priya and Gerald, of every person who had ever stood in a parking lot and felt invisible. One question, she said to Michael. Before we go, anything. When we get there, if he apologizes, what happens? Michael considered this for a moment with genuine thoughtfulness, the way he always considered things that actually mattered. That depends on whether the apology is real, he said finally, and whether it goes to the right people. She nodded. And if it isn't real, then Michael said quietly, he's still going to have to stand in a room full of the people whose opinion defines his career and explain every one of those faces. Every person he decided had no one standing beside them. Emily looked at him one more time. Then she walked to the passenger seat of Danny's truck because she hadn't come this far to stand at the back. And 23 engines turned over in the warm Arizona evening, and they drove. The convoy moved through the Arizona evening like something inevitable. 23 bikes and Danny's truck rolling in formation down the interstate toward Phoenix, the engines a low, steady thunder that other drivers heard before they saw. Nobody in that convoy was speeding. Nobody was riding reckless. Michael Hayes had been very specific about that before they left the lot. We ride clean tonight, he'd said. Everything clean. And that was how they went organized, deliberate, the kind of procession that turned heads, not because it was threatening, but because it had weight, because it moved like it had somewhere specific to be and was completely certain it would get there. Emily sat in the front seat of Danny's truck and watched the road. Danny Cross was not a talkative man under normal circumstances, and tonight he seemed to understand without being told that Emily didn't need conversation. He drove, she thought. The miles passed. Somewhere in the middle of that drive, her phone buzzed with a text from Kara. On my way, 30 minutes out. Still can't believe I said yes. Emily typed back, I'm glad you did. A pause. Then, he's never going to expect this is he. Emily looked out at the bikes moving alongside the truck. At Michael riding just ahead, her hair visible, even at highway speed posture, utterly composed. No, she typed. He's not. She put her phone in her pocket and let herself breathe for the first time in hours. Here was the thing about Ryan Mitchell that nobody at his investor dinner tonight understood, yet he had built his entire sense of safety on a single assumption. That assumption was not that he was untouchable. Even men like Ryan knew in some back corner of their minds that nobody is entirely untouchable. The assumption was simpler than that. It was that the people he hurt didn't have anyone. That the women at gas pumps, and the parking attendants, and the junior associates, and the restaurant managers existed in his world as background figures unconnected to anything that could reach him. Isolated, replaceable, forgettable. He had looked at Emily Hayes yesterday afternoon and made that calculation in about 4 seconds. He was wrong in about 400 ways. And tonight, every one of those ways was driving toward downtown Phoenix. Danny glanced over at her once, just once. You doing okay? Yes, she said, and meant it. Michael told me what happened, Danny said, at the gas station. He paused. He didn't tell me right away. He waited until he had a plan. You know how he is. I know how he is, she said. He was calm the whole time, Danny said. Completely calm, but I've known that man for 19 years. And the only time he gets that calm is when something matters enough that he can't afford not to be. He paused again. Just so you know. Emily nodded. She already knew. She'd seen it at the kitchen table when Michael had set his phone face down and looked at her. That particular stillness, that absence of heat, because heat was reactive. What Michael felt about what had happened to Emily wasn't reactive at all. It was settled, decided, the kind of thing a man carries in his chest quietly until the moment is right. She was still thinking about that when her phone buzzed again. Jerome this time parked 2 blocks over. Priya and Gerald are with me. We're ready when you are. She texted back the address. Then she put the phone away and watched Phoenix rise on the horizon. The Sterling House was the kind of restaurant that didn't advertise. It didn't need to. It operated on reputation alone. The kind of place where serious money came to talk to other serious money in an atmosphere of quiet, expensive calm. Dark wood, excellent wine list, private dining rooms that could be reserved for 30 to 50 guests. The sort of establishment where the staff was trained to be invisible and the food was secondary to the conversations that happened around it. Ryan Mitchell had reserved the Chandler room for 42 guests. His celebration dinner had started at 7. It was now 7:48. The convoy pulled off the interstate. Michael's voice came through Danny's radio. They'd been using a channel the whole ride. We park on Grant, not in their lot, on Grant. A pause. Everyone stays calm. No one moves until Emily and I are inside. 23 confirmations came back one after another like a roll call. Danny parked on Grant Street. Emily got out. The evening air was warm, the city sounds mixing with the distant engine off of 24 bikes going quiet one by one. Michael was beside her before she'd taken 3 steps. He didn't say anything. He just fell into step with her, the way he always did, not ahead, not behind, exactly beside. His hand found the small of her back for just a moment. A check-in. I'm here, you're not alone. We move when you're ready. She moved. They walked toward the Sterling House's main entrance together, and 6 of the chapter's most senior members fell into place behind them. Not crowding, not aggressive, just present. Just undeniably, visibly present. The host at the front stand was a young man of maybe 25, and to his extraordinary credit, he kept his composure when they walked in. His eyes went to Michael's cut, to the 5 men behind him, to Emily beside him, and then professionally, impressively, he said, "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "We're here to speak with Ryan Mitchell," Michael said. "He's in the Chandler room." A fractional hesitation. "I'm sorry, that's a private event this evening. I'd need to—" "This won't take long," Michael said, "and it's important." He said it the way he said most things, without threat, without volume, without any particular color at all. Just a simple, factual statement delivered by a man whose face made it clear he intended to be heard. The host picked up the phone. Emily stood straight beside Michael. She could feel her pulse, but it was steady. She had expected to be more afraid by this point. She wasn't. Something had settled in her over the course of the drive, the same thing that had settled in her over years of living alongside a man who had taught her, without ever making it a lesson, that you don't have to be the loudest person in the room to be the most significant one. The host spoke quietly into the phone. Hung up. "If you'll just wait one moment." "Of course," Emily said pleasantly. 20 seconds later, a restaurant manager appeared, older, composed, tie straight, the practiced calm of someone who had managed difficult situations before. He looked at the group. He looked at Michael. He said, "Can I help you, Ryan Mitchell?" Michael said. "Chandler room. We need a few minutes of his time." "Sir, as I'm sure the host explained, Mr. Mitchell has a private event this evening. I'm afraid—" "Gerald Hines," Emily said. The manager blinked. "I'm sorry." "Gerald Hines," Emily repeated. "Does that name mean anything to you?" "He worked at a restaurant about like this one. About 2 years ago. There was a charity dinner. Ring anything?" The manager stared at her. "It's not a trick question," Emily said. "I'm asking because the man in your Chandler room has a pattern. And some of the people in that pattern are outside right now, and they'd very much like 5 minutes. She held his gaze. "We're not here to cause a scene. We're here to prevent one. There's a difference." Something shifted in the manager's face. Not alarm, marm, something closer to recognition. "Give us 5 minutes," Michael said. "If Mr. Mitchell wants us to leave after 5 minutes, we'll leave." The manager straightened his tie, looked once more at the group behind Michael, came to some internal decision. "I'll let him know you're here," he said. "Wait here, please." He disappeared. Emily exhaled. Behind her, she heard one of the men, Big Lou, say very quietly to no one in particular, "That was good. That was real good." She almost smiled. 1 minute passed, then 2, then the door to the Chandler room opened and Ryan Mitchell stepped into the corridor. He looked exactly as she remembered. The silver hair, the expensive casual shirt tonight, a darker shade slate blue, the watch. The posture of a man who had walked through his entire life ahead of everyone else in every room. He came around the corner with an expression of mild, controlled irritation, already composing some polite but firm dismissal the way a man does when he assumes an interruption is beneath his time. Then he saw Emily. The expression on his face went through several things very quickly. Recognition, confusion, calculation, then something that was not quite fear, but was close enough to its cousin that it lived in the same neighborhood. He looked at Michael, at the men behind Michael, at the Hells Angels cut on Michael's back, and then back at Emily. "You had," he said, "just that, one word." "Me," Emily said. Ryan's jaw tightened. He looked around the corridor manager hovering near the kitchen entrance host at his stand, a passing server who had clearly been told to find somewhere else to be. He pulled himself together with visible effort. "I don't know what you think you're, Ryan." Michael's voice. Just his name. Conversational. Easy. The way you'd address someone you'd known for years. Ryan looked at him. I'm Michael Hayes, Michael said. Emily's husband. He extended his hand. A pause that stretched 3 full seconds. Then Ryan shook it because some reflexes go too deep to override even when every instinct is screaming. We'd like a few minutes, Michael said. That's all? A few minutes of your time, and then we'll go. I have guests, Ryan said. His voice was steady. Emily gave him credit for that. We know, Michael said. That's actually part of it. Ryan looked at him. Part of what? Michael smiled. It was a small smile, and it was entirely genuine, which somehow made it the most disquieting thing in the corridor. Why don't we talk inside? Ryan Mitchell opened his mouth to say no, and at exactly that moment, the front door of the Sterling house opened, and Kara walked in. She was 34 years old, dark-haired, professionally dressed, and she was shaking. Anyone who looked at her could see she was shaking, but she walked through that door and she stood behind Emily like she'd been invited because she had been, and she didn't look away from Ryan Mitchell when he noticed her. He noticed her, and the color very slightly left his face. Because he recognized her. That was immediately clear. He recognized her in the way people recognize things they've tried not to think about, with that split-second jolt of something that passes through the eyes before the composure slams back down over it. Who is he started? Kara Linwood, Emily said. She was the events coordinator at the Meridian Ballroom. About 2 years ago, company dinner, table placement. She watched him. You remember? It wasn't a question. Ryan said nothing. And Jerome Williams is outside, Emily continued. He was a parking attendant at the Hyatt on Central, and Priya Nair was a junior associate at Kessler Partners, and Gerald Hines managed the banquet room at the Riverside Club. She paused. Those are just the ones from the last 3 years. We started making calls at 9 o'clock this morning. By noon, we had 4 people who said yes immediately, not because we talked them into anything, because they'd been waiting. Ryan's jaw worked. Waiting, he repeated, like the word was in a language he didn't fully speak. For someone to finally show up, Emily said. The corridor was absolutely silent. Ryan Mitchell stood very still. He was a man who was accustomed to controlling the temperature of every room. He entered the pace, the tone, the direction. And right now he was standing in a restaurant hallway with his guests 20 feet behind a closed door, and in front of him was a woman he'd thrown money at yesterday afternoon, and beside her was her husband. And behind them was a network of people he had walked past and over and through for years without once imagining they would ever be in the same room at the same time looking directly at him. What do you want? He asked finally. The question was flat, stripped of its usual authority. I want you to walk into that room, Emily said, and I want you to tell the people in there what you did yesterday in your own words. Silence. Silence. That's it, Ryan said. And the others, Emily said, what you did to Kara, to Jerome, to all of them. She paused. In front of the people who matter most to you professionally. The way you did it to us in front of the people around us. Ryan's expression shifted. You can't be serious. Completely, Emily said. I'm not going to stand in front of my investors and you don't have to, Michael said. Everyone looked at him. He'd been quiet for a full 2 minutes and the quiet had given his voice, when he used it now, a particular weight. Nobody is making you do anything, Ryan. Walk back in that room, finish your dinner, have your celebration. A pause. We'll wait. Ryan stared at him. We'll wait outside, Michael said simply. And when your dinner is done and your investors are leaving, and some of them come out to get their cars, we'll be there. And we'll tell them. Without you being part of it. Without you having any control over how it's said or what they think when they hear it. Another pause. Or, Michael said, you walk in there now, on your own terms, in your own words, and whatever happens after that, you were the one who faced it. Ryan Mitchell looked at Michael Hayes for a long, still moment, and for the first time in a very long time, a man who had built his entire life on reading rooms and calculating advantages and knowing exactly how much he could take from any situation found himself in a room he could not read. Because Michael Hayes was not angry. He was not posturing. He was not performing. He was simply stating facts in the voice of a man who had already decided how this ended and was now simply waiting for the other person to catch up. You're not going to let this go, Ryan said. It was almost quiet, almost something that could have been the beginning of understanding. No, Michael said. Even if Ryan stopped, started again. Even if I apologized right now to her. He looked at Emily, privately. Emily didn't flinch. Too late for private, she said. Ryan's hands at his sides closed slowly into fists and then opened again. What you're asking me to do is career suicide. What you did yesterday was your choice, Emily said. What you did to Kara was your choice. What you did to Jerome and Gerald and Priya, every single one of those, was a choice you made because you decided the cost was zero. She looked at him steadily. I'm asking you to find out what the cost actually is. The silence stretched so long that somewhere in the restaurant, a glass clinked and a man's laughter rose briefly and fell away. Ryan Mitchell closed his eyes just for a moment. It was the most human thing Emily had seen him do. When he opened them, something had changed. Not everything, not the silver hair or the expensive watch or the posture that came from a lifetime of expecting the world to rearrange itself around him. But something somewhere behind his eyes had shifted. The calculation had run its course and the answer wasn't what he wanted. 5 minutes, he said. Michael nodded. Ryan turned and walked back toward the Chandler room. He stopped at the door with his hand on the frame. He didn't look back. Does she come in? He asked, meaning Emily. We all come in, Michael said. A moment. Then Ryan pushed the door open and walked through. Michael looked at Emily. She looked back at him. Kara behind her let out a breath that sounded like she'd been holding it for 2 years. Okay, Emily said quietly. They walked in. The Chandler room held 42 people at 7 long tables arranged in a loose horseshoe. Investors, partners, associates, a few spouses. The average age was probably 55. The average net worth was something Emily couldn't have calculated and had no interest in. These were people who wore their success the way Ryan wore his, as a kind of atmosphere, something they moved through rather than carried. Every head turned when the door opened. Ryan stood at the front of the room. He had not sat down. He stood in front of his own guests and he looked for a moment like a man standing at the edge of something very high, trying to decide whether the fall would kill him. I need a few minutes, he said. His voice was measured, professional. The control was remarkable, Emily thought. Even now, even here. Something's come up that I need to address. A few people exchanged glances. A man near the far end of the table, 50s, heavy-set, the kind of man who looked like he'd made money in oil, said, Ryan, what's going on? Ryan looked at Emily. Emily waited. And Ryan Mitchell, standing in front of the 42 most professionally significant people in his life, began to talk. He didn't start with an apology. That would have been too easy and too incomplete, and Emily suspected he knew it. He started with what happened. Yesterday afternoon, a gas station on the west side of Tucson, a woman whose card wouldn't read, the things he'd said, the money he'd dropped, the words. He said the words. He said them out loud in a quiet and even voice, and you could feel them land in the room like stones in still water. Then he said Kara's name, the ballroom, the dinner, what he'd said in front of her staff and her clients, then Jerome, then Priya, then Gerald. With each name, a small shift happened in the room. People who had been waiting for a business explanation were realizing they weren't getting one. People who had known Ryan for years were doing something with their faces that they were trying to keep private and not entirely succeeding at. The oil money man near the far table had stopped moving entirely. A woman in her 60s, 3 seats down, had set her wine glass very slowly on the table. Ryan stopped talking. The room was very quiet. Emily stood in the doorway. She didn't move forward. She didn't speak. She had said everything she needed to say in the quarter. It was Kara who stepped forward. She walked to the center of the room and her voice when she used it was shaking, but it was clear. My name is Kara Linwood, she said. I worked the Meridian event he just described. I didn't say anything for 2 years because I was afraid. Not of him specifically, just afraid. Of what it would cost, of who would believe me, of whether it mattered. She paused. Tonight someone called me and told me I didn't have to stand alone in it. And her voice caught. She steadied it. I needed to hear that. I needed to know that someone showed up. Nobody in that room spoke. Michael, standing just inside the door beside Emily, said nothing. He didn't need to. The room had already changed. And Ryan Mitchell, standing at the front of his own celebration dinner, in front of the 42 people whose regard he'd built his entire professional identity around, was looking at Emily Hayes with an expression that had moved entirely past calculation. He looked for the first time since she'd met him like a man who was genuinely, completely sorry. Not sorry he'd been caught. Not sorry about the inconvenience. Sorry. Emily held his gaze. She didn't nod. She didn't smile. She didn't give him anything, but she didn't look away either. Because this was what she had come for, not his destruction, not his humiliation, not the satisfaction of watching him squirm in front of his colleagues, though she understood honestly why someone might want that. She had come for the moment when the cost became real. She had come for the moment when the calculation he'd run at that gas pump, the one that told him she was powerless, that she was alone, that the consequence would be zero, showed itself to be completely irreversibly wrong. That moment was now. The oil money man pushed his chair back from the table. He looked at Ryan for a long time. Then he looked at Emily. Then he said in a voice that carried the particular quiet authority of someone who has nothing left to prove. "Young lady, I want to apologize on behalf of everyone in this room who wasn't there yesterday and should have been." Emily looked at him. "That's a generous thing to say," she said carefully. "But the apology I needed was the one that just happened." The man nodded slowly. "Fair enough," he said, and sat back down. Ryan Mitchell was still standing at the front of the room. He looked older than he had in the quarter. Not physically, just something internal, some scaffolding that had been holding a certain version of himself upright for a very long time had quietly given way. "I'm sorry," he said. He was looking at Emily when he said it. Then he looked at Kara. Then at the door as if he could see Jerome and Gerald and Priya through it. "I'm sorry," he said again, "for all of it." Emily studied him for a moment. Then she said, "I hear you. Not I forgive you. Not it's okay. Not we're done here. Just I hear you. Because some things needed to be said and witnessed before they could be anything else. And the hearing was the first step, not the last one." She turned to Michael. He was watching her with an expression she knew very well. Not pride exactly, because pride implied surprise, and Michael Hayes was not surprised by who Emily was. More like recognition. Like a man watching someone be exactly themselves and finding it after all these years still remarkable. She nodded at him. He opened the door. They walked out together. Kara came right behind them, and when the door closed on the Chandler room, she made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob, pressed both hands to her face and said, through her fingers, "I cannot believe that just happened." "Believe it," Big Lou said from the hallway where he'd been waiting this whole time, with the quiet patience of a man who had learned that the best support is often the kind that stays out of the way until it's needed. Michael guided Emily through the restaurant lobby, past the host who held the door open without being asked, and out into the evening air, where 23 people were waiting on Grant Street. Jerome was there standing with Priya and Gerald near Danny's truck. They hadn't gone in. Emily hadn't asked them to, but they were there because showing up was the point. Showing up was always the point. Jerome looked at Emily's face as she came down the steps. "Well," he said. "He said it," Emily told him, out loud, in front of all of them. "Your name. What happened?" Jerome stood very still. Then he made a sound, a short involuntary exhale, and turned slightly away. His shoulders moved once. He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth. Gerald reached over and put a hand on his shoulder without a word. Priya looked at Emily. "Did he mean it?" she asked. "The apology. Did it seem real?" Emily thought about Ryan's face, the scaffolding giving way, the older version of himself visible for just that moment, underneath the silver and the watch, and the cost-benefit calculations he'd been running since the day he decided the world owed him deference. "I think," she said carefully, "that tonight was the first time in a long time he had to see all of it together. What he'd done, what it added up to." She paused. "Whether that changes him, I don't know. That part's not mine to control." Priya nodded slowly. "But we were heard." "Yes," Emily said, "we were heard." Michael stood beside Emily on the sidewalk. Around them, people were talking quietly the way people talk after something significant, carefully, like they're still deciding what it means. Kara had sat down on a low wall and was typing something on her phone, her hands still trembling slightly. Big Lou was telling Danny something. Two of the younger members of the chapter were standing with Jerome, and Jerome was telling them something too, and whatever it was made one of the younger men nod in a way that looked like he was filing it somewhere. Michael said quietly, just to Emily, "How are you doing?" She thought about it honestly. "I feel like I left something heavy at the door, and I'm still figuring out what to do with the empty space." He nodded. He understood that. She knew he understood it because he'd felt it himself years ago in situations that had nothing to do with gas stations, bigger, harder situations. And he'd learned the same thing she was learning now, that putting something down doesn't immediately feel like relief. Sometimes it just feels like your hands don't know what to do. You did right by all of them, he said. We did, she corrected. He almost smiled. We did. She leaned against him for a moment. Not dramatically, not for anyone else, just the ordinary private geometry of two people who had been together long enough to fit against each other without thinking about it. He's going to have a hard few weeks, she said. Probably, Michael agreed. Do you think the investors? Some of them will pull back, Michael said. That's not our business anymore. We said what needed saying. What happens in that room from here forward is his to figure out. Emily nodded. The evening was cooling off around them. Somewhere down Grant Street, a car horn blared briefly and went quiet. The city kept doing what cities do, indifferent, enormous, moving in every direction at once. But on this particular stretch of sidewalk, 20-some people stood in the aftermath of something that had started with money on the ground at a gas pump and had become, in the space of 24 hours, something considerably larger and harder to put back in its box. Emily pulled out her phone. She had 3 new texts, 2 she didn't recognize, numbers she didn't have saved. Both short messages, both saying approximately the same thing. The first one said, I heard what happened tonight. There are more of us. Can we talk? She stared at that for a moment. Then she showed it to Michael. He read it, looked at her, read it again. More of us, Emily said quietly. Michael looked up at the Phoenix skyline, then down at her. Looks like this wasn't just about yesterday, he said. She looked at the text again, at the unknown number, at the words that meant someone somewhere had heard something tonight and felt for the first time in however long that there might be room for them in the story. More of us. She put the phone in her pocket. And for the first time since she'd stood at Pump 7 watching money fall to the ground, Emily Hayes felt something shift, not just the anger settling, not just the satisfaction of having been heard, but something broader and less personal, something that had to do with all the people who had stood in parking slots and offices and ballrooms and felt invisible and had stayed that way because no one had ever shown up. Until now. She looked at Michael. I think we need to make a phone call tonight, she said. He tilted his head. To who? She looked at the unknown number on her phone. To whoever this is, she said, and then whoever they know. Michael studied her face for a long moment. That expression, again recognition. The particular recognition of a man watching the woman he loves arrive at something important. Okay, he said simply. She dialed. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. The voice on the other end was a woman. Mid-40s, Emily guessed. The kind of voice that had learned to stay controlled even when the thing underneath it wasn't. Hello, she said, careful, slightly out of breath like she'd been working up to making this call herself and then someone else had called first. This is Emily Hayes, Emily said. You texted me. A pause. I didn't think you'd call back tonight. Well, Emily said, tonight seemed like the right time. Another pause, longer this time, and Emily let it breathe. She'd learned that about people who were carrying something heavy, they needed a moment to shift the weight before they could set it down. You couldn't rush that. You couldn't fill the silence with your own voice just because the quiet was uncomfortable. My name is Sandra Oler, the woman said finally. I live in Scottsdale. I had a business meeting with Ryan Mitchell 4 years ago. I was trying to get financing for a small property development. Nothing like what he does, just a small commercial space. I had savings. I had a solid plan. She stopped. He sat across from me for about 40 minutes, and then he told me in front of 2 of his associates that women with my background shouldn't be making financial decisions above their pay grade. A breath. He used those words, exactly those words. Emily's jaw tightened. She kept her voice even. Did you pursue it, the financing, the complaint, anything? I went home, Sandra said, and I spent about 2 days trying to figure out what I should do. And then I decided that he was Ryan Mitchell and I was nobody. And nobody doesn't win that fight, she paused. Or at least that's what I thought. What changed your mind tonight? Someone in that dinner room texted a friend of theirs about what happened. Word got around, and I have a mutual contact with one of the people who was in that room tonight, and she called me about an hour ago. Sandra's voice shifted, something coming up underneath the controlled surface. She told me what you did. She told me you walked in there with your husband and those people and you made him say it out loud. She said you didn't yell. You didn't threaten anyone. You just made the cost real. A pause. And I sat there after she hung up and I thought I had been waiting 4 years for that phone call. I just didn't know it. Emily was quiet for a moment. Michael was watching her. So was Kara from the low wall. Jerome had gone quiet too, as if he understood something significant was happening. Sandra, Emily said, I want you to know something. What happened to you matters. What he said to you mattered. And the fact that you didn't fight it then doesn't mean you were wrong. It means you were doing the best you could with the information you had at the time. She paused. The information is different now. A long exhale on the other end. Then, what are you planning to do? I don't know yet, Emily said honestly. Tonight was tonight, but there are people here, good people, who I think are asking the same question you're asking, and I think the answer might need more than one phone call. I have documentation, Sandra said suddenly. I saved everything, the emails before the meeting, notes I wrote afterward. I took a recording on my phone, in my bag. I don't even know why I did it. I just had a feeling. I felt something move through her. Not excitement exactly. Something more like the specific sensation of a door that's been locked for a long time, finally finding the right key. Don't delete anything, Emily said. Nothing. Can you come to Tucson? When? This week. Whenever you can. Wednesday, Sandra said, without hesitation, like the decision had been made the moment Emily called back. I can be there Wednesday. Then we'll see you Wednesday, Emily said. You're not nobody, Sandra. You never were. She hung up, looked at Michael. He'd heard enough from her side to understand most of it. She has documentation, Emily said. Michael's expression didn't change dramatically, but his eyes sharpened. What kind? Emails, notes, a recording, a beat of silence. A record from 4 years ago, Emily said. She kept it. She didn't even know why she kept it. She just kept it. Big Lou, who had drifted close enough to hear, made a sound low in his chest. People keep things, he said. When something happens to them and they can't fight back in the moment, sometimes they hold on to the evidence like it's the one piece of power they have left, even if they never use it. Emily nodded. That was exactly right. She understood it viscerally in the way you understand something that matches your own experience perfectly. This is getting bigger, Kara said from the wall. Not alarmed, just naming it. Yes, Emily agreed. Are you okay with that? Kara asked. Emily thought about it. Real thought, not the reflexive yes she might have given an hour ago. She thought about what bigger meant: more people, more stories, more weight to carry, more complexity, more chances for things to go wrong in directions she couldn't anticipate tonight on a sidewalk in Phoenix after what was already the most significant day she'd had in years. Then she thought about Sandra Aller sitting alone in Scottsdale for 4 years with a phone recording she didn't know why she'd kept. Yes, she said, I'm okay with that. Michael put his hand briefly on the back of her neck. Not possessive, just present. His way of saying, I'm still here. We're still in this together. Let's go home, he said. We have work to do. They rode back to Tucson under a sky that had gone fully dark, the stars out and sharp above the desert. Emily sat in Danny's truck again and did not think for most of the ride. She just let the motion carry her and the warm air through the half-open window and the distant sound of Michael's bike 3 vehicles ahead. She'd filled Danny in on the Sandra call. He'd listened without comment, which was his version of being impressed. By the time they got back to the chapter house, it was past 11. Most of the convoy dispersed people had jobs, families, morning obligations. But 6 of them stayed: Michael, Danny, Big Lou Rook, a woman named Carmen, who served as the chapter's legal liaison and had a paralegal background, and a mind like a steel trap, and Emily herself. They sat around the kitchen table with the remains of a coffee pot and Carmen's yellow legal pad in the kind of collective focus that felt less like planning and more like something crystallizing. What are we actually doing here? Carmen said, not a question, more like the starting gun for a conversation that needed to happen. We're helping people who were wronged, Emily said. With what goal? Carmen pressed. Not unkindly, just precise. That was Carmen. Short term tonight was clean. He said what he did in front of his people. There are natural consequences from that: reputation, business relationships, his investors making different calculations. That's organic. That's his own choices coming back to him. She tapped her pen on the pad. But the moment you start collecting documentation and organizing multiple complainants, you're in different territory. You're either building toward a legal action or you're building toward a public disclosure. Those are very different things with very different risks. What risks? Michael asked. Directly, because that was Michael. Defamation exposure for one, Carmen said. If you gather people's accounts and you share them publicly and Ryan Mitchell's attorneys decide to be aggressive about it, some of those people could find themselves in uncomfortable legal positions, especially the ones without documentation. She looked at Emily. The recording Sandra has, if it exists, and it's what she says it is, that potentially changes things. But recordings have their own legal complications depending on Arizona law. She paused. Arizona is a one-party consent state for recordings. So if Sandra recorded it herself on her device in a conversation she was party to, that recording is legal. Rook, who had been quiet, said, "What's in the recording specifically?" "Did she say?" "Not in detail," Emily said. "Just that it documents what he said to her in the meeting, his exact words." "If the words are what she described to you," Carmen said carefully, "and if there are witnesses to corroborate, we might be looking at something that goes beyond a private confrontation." "Meaning what?" Big Lou asked. "Meaning," Carmen said, "that a pattern of discriminatory behavior in a professional business context documented, witnessed, recorded, is the kind of thing that lawyers get interested in. Not street lawyers, real ones." She put her pen down. "I have a contact, Lisa Mendez. She practices employment and civil rights law in Phoenix. She's not flashy, she's thorough, and she has taken on people like Ryan Mitchell before." She looked around the table. "If Emily's willing, and if the others are willing, I think we need to make a different kind of call tomorrow. Not to more victims, to someone who knows how to build this the right way." Silence around the table. Emily looked at Michael. He looked back at her. Neither of them spoke for a moment because this was one of those moments where the decision was genuinely hers, not theirs. Hers. She was the one who had driven home from a gas station with money on the ground behind her. She was the one who had made the calls and knocked on the door of the Chandler room. And she was the one who now had to decide how far she was willing to go. "Tomorrow," Emily said, "we call Lisa Mendez." Carmen nodded and wrote the name down. "And Sandra," Emily added, "I want Sandra in the room when we make that call. She's been waiting 4 years. She doesn't wait another week." Carmen wrote that down too. "One more thing," Rook said. Everyone looked at him. Rook was a man who almost never said more than he needed to, which meant when he said something, it tended to land. "Before this goes any further, Ryan Mitchell is going to wake up tomorrow morning and realize what happened tonight has the potential to follow him. He's going to call his lawyers. Maybe tonight, maybe first thing in the morning, but it's coming." "I know," Michael said. "Which means the window for him to try to control the narrative is opening right now," Rook said. "He might reach out. He might try to settle privately. He might do something less predictable." He paused. "I just think it's worth naming." Michael nodded slowly. "You're right." He looked at Emily. "If he contacts you, any kind of contact, you don't respond without Carmen in the loop." "Agreed." "Agreed," Emily said. "And whatever he offers, money, apology, anything, nothing gets decided without the others. Kara, Jerome, Sandra, all of them. Their situation is bound up in this now." Emily felt the weight of that, the specific weight of becoming the person other people's trust depended on. She'd signed up for it the moment she made that first call to Kara. She knew that. But feeling it intellectually and feeling it in your chest at 11:30 at night at your kitchen table were different experiences. "I understand," she said. They stayed at that table another 40 minutes. Carmen made lists. Rook handled logistics for the following day. Danny volunteered to be available as driver for whatever Wednesday looked like with Sandra coming in. Big Lou made another pot of coffee that nobody really needed, but everyone drank. And Michael mostly listened. That was the thing about Michael in rooms like this. He led without crowding the space. He had opinions and he gave them when asked, but he understood that what Emily needed from him right now wasn't direction. It was ballast. Something steady to move against when she needed to push, and something solid to rest against when she needed to breathe. By midnight, everyone had gone home except Michael and Emily. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles after a day of enormous noise. Not empty quiet, but full quiet. The kind that's made of everything that happened and is still vibrating at a frequency just below what ears can process. Emily stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing out coffee cups, doing the small, ordinary thing, because sometimes the small, ordinary thing is the only way to come back to yourself after a day that has moved you further than you expected to go. Michael came and stood beside her. He picked up a dish towel, dried what she washed. They did this in complete silence for several minutes. Then Emily said, "Do you think he'll come after us?" Michael considered it honestly. "Legally, maybe. His lawyers will look for angles. Carmen will tell us if there's anything real to worry about. He paused. Personally, no. I don't think Ryan Mitchell is the kind of man who fights in the open when he loses. He recalculates. He finds a different strategy. He dried a mug carefully, which means the most dangerous version of him isn't the one who comes at us directly. It's the one who goes quiet and tries to manage the story from behind the scenes. Emily thought about that. So we need to move faster than he does. Carmen's already on it, Michael said. Lisa Mendez tomorrow, Sandra Wednesday, the others as soon as they're ready. He put the mug in the cabinet. We're not behind Emily, we're ahead. He's been reacting to us since the moment you walked into that restaurant. She handed him the last cup. He dried it. I keep thinking about something, she said. What? The people who were at that gas station yesterday, she said. The ones who didn't say anything, the man at pump 4, the woman who gasped and turned away. She was quiet for a moment. They're not bad people, probably. They just didn't want the cost. And I've been thinking the whole time we were doing all of this today that the real problem isn't Ryan Mitchell. She paused. The real problem is that so many people had already decided the math didn't work out in favor of speaking up. And until the math changes, she stopped. Michael waited. Until the math changes, she said, there will always be another Ryan Mitchell, and the woman at the next gas pump will be alone the same way I was alone. Michael set the dish towel down. He turned to face her. He looked at her for a long moment with the expression she'd learned over 8 years to read as the one he wore when she'd said something that landed precisely where it should. Then we change the math, he said. She looked at him. How? By making sure enough people know this story ends differently than he thought it would, Michael said. By making sure that the next person who thinks about throwing money on the ground has to do the calculation and comes up with a different answer. He paused. That's what this week has already been. That's what Sandra calling tonight already is. The math is already changing. Emily leaned against the counter. She was exhausted in a way that was also deeply clean, the specific exhaustion of having done something that mattered, which was different from the exhaustion of work or worry or the ordinary wearing down of days. I need to sleep, she said. Yes, Michael said, and tomorrow is going to be complicated. Yes, he said again, but you've handled complicated before. She almost laughed. I have, haven't I? They turned off the kitchen light. The next morning came fast and sharp, the way mornings do when you have things on your calendar that matter. Emily was up at 6. Carmen called at 7:15 with an update. She had spoken to Lisa Mendez the night before she texted, actually, and Lisa had called back within 20 minutes, which Carmen said was significant because Lisa did not call back at 11 p.m. for things that didn't interest her. Lisa wanted to hear the full picture. She was available at 2 p.m. that afternoon. Emily texted Sandra immediately. Are you free this afternoon at 2? Phone call with an attorney. I want you on it. Sandra's reply came back in under 3 minutes, rearranging my whole day. Yes. By 8:30, Emily had also heard from Jerome, who had apparently not slept much and had spent the night writing down everything he remembered from the parking garage incident, dates, times, what was said, who was nearby. He texted it all in a long message that read like a man pouring out something he'd been holding in a jar for 2 years. She read every word. By 9, she heard from Priya, who was quieter, but said she had spoken to a former colleague who had been present at the meeting where Ryan had humiliated her and who was willing to corroborate what happened. A witness, an actual corroborating witness. Emily forwarded everything to Carmen without comment. Carmen's response was a single line: Lisa is going to want to talk to all of them. By 10:30, something else happened that nobody had anticipated. Emily's phone buzzed with an unknown number. Different from Sandra's. She answered. Is this Emily Hayes' male voice, older, formal? It is, she said. Who's calling? My name is Thomas Briggs, the man said. I'm an attorney with Harwell and Briggs in Phoenix. I've been asked to reach out to you on behalf of my client, Ryan Mitchell. A pause. Careful, the kind of careful that meant the attorney understood exactly what had happened the previous evening and was constructing every sentence accordingly. My client would like to express his sincere desire to resolve last evening's situation in a mutually agreeable manner. He is prepared to... Mr. Briggs, Emily said. He stopped. I need to tell you 2 things, she said. First, I now have legal representation, and you'll need to direct any further communication through her. She glanced at Carmen's number on her phone. Her name is Carmen Rodriguez, and I'll have her contact information sent to your office within the hour. A pause. I see. And the second thing, The second thing, Emily said, is that this is no longer a matter between Ryan Mitchell and me. There are other people involved, other experiences. If your client is interested in resolution, genuine resolution, it's going to need to be a conversation that includes all of them, not a private arrangement that makes the problem disappear quietly. Silence on the other end, the kind of silence that meant the attorney was recalculating something. I'll relay that to my client, Thomas Briggs said finally. Thank you, Emily said. And Mr. Briggs, one more thing. Yes. Tell your client that I don't want his money, she said. I want him to understand what happened. Those are different things, and the path to the second one doesn't go through your office. She hung up. Her hands were completely steady. She called Carmen immediately, told her everything. Carmen listened without interrupting, then said, Good. You did exactly right. Forward me his number and I'll make contact by noon. Another pause. Emily, he called his lawyer this morning. That means last night landed harder than he let on. That is actually good news for us. Why? Because people who think they have power to burn don't call attorneys in the morning, Carmen said. They call attorneys when they're scared, and Ryan Mitchell is scared. A beat, which means he knows the pattern is real, he knows it can be proven, and he knows that if this goes further, he can't control it. Emily sat with that for a moment. Okay, she said, 2:00. 2:00, Carmen confirmed. At 2 p.m., Emily sat at the kitchen table with her phone on speaker, and Carmen beside her and Lisa Mendez's voice came through crisp, direct, the voice of a woman who had spent decades in rooms that didn't welcome her and had one anyway. Walk me through everything, Lisa said. Don't summarize, just tell it. So Emily told it, from pump 7 to the corridor to the Chandler room to Sandra's call to Briggs this morning. She told it straight through without editorializing the way Michael had taught her, by example, facts first. Feelings acknowledged but not leading, let the sequence make the argument. Sandra came on partway through and told her own story. Jerome called in and did the same. Carmen had conference called all of them in, and they went around the line and each one said what had happened to them, and Lisa Mendez listened to every word without interrupting once. When the last person finished, there was a brief silence. Then Lisa said, The recording is the cornerstone. Sandra, I need to hear it before I can tell you what we're working with. Can you get it to me securely before end of day? Yes, Sandra said, no hesitation. And the corroborating witness, Priya mentioned, and I'll need a statement. Notarized, not just a text conversation. Lisa paused. This is preliminary. I want to be clear about that. I'm not telling you what this becomes until I review everything. But what I can tell you right now is that there is a pattern here. Patterns matter in law. They change the story from a bad day to something that has a name. What name? Emily asked. Possibly several, Lisa said. Hostile environment, incitement, intimidation, discriminatory conduct, depending on the professional context. She stopped herself. Let me see the materials first. But I want everyone on this call to understand one thing. Her voice shifted slightly, still professional, still precise, but warmer underneath. You did something unusual last night. You brought people together who had been scattered and isolated, and you gave them the experience of being believed and witnessed in a public setting. In my experience, and I have done this work for a long time, that experience alone changes something fundamental for people. It changes what they believe they deserve. A pause. So regardless of what we do legally, what you did last night was already significant. Jerome said from his phone, Can I say something? Please, Lisa said. I've been carrying what happened in that garage for 2 years, he said. His voice was steady but full. I told my wife, I told one friend, and both of them said basically the same thing, just move on. It's not worth it. You can't win against someone like that. He paused. Last night, for the first time, someone showed up and treated it like it was worth fighting. And I don't know yet what's going to happen legally or anything. But I walked into my house last night and I felt different. And I think that matters. I think that's worth saying. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Lisa said quietly, It matters very much, Jerome. Thank you for saying it. After the call ended, Carmen and Emily sat at the kitchen table in the afternoon quiet. How do you feel? Carmen asked. Like the ground shifted, Emily said. Not in a bad way, just shifted. Carmen nodded. She'd been making notes the whole call. Her yellow legal pad was covered. Lisa's good, she said, one of the best. If she takes this on, Ryan Mitchell is going to need significantly better attorneys than Thomas Briggs. She capped her pen. She'll take it on. I know her. She heard Jerome and she was done deciding. Emily leaned back in her chair. Through the kitchen window, she could hear bikes, chapter members coming and going on the road out front. The ordinary rhythm of an ordinary afternoon that happened to be sitting inside an extraordinary week. Her phone buzzed. A text from Michael. How'd the call go? She wrote back. Lisa heard Jerome. She's in. His reply was immediate. Good. Then a few seconds later, you doing okay? She smiled at that. 8 years of marriage, and that was still the question. The one that cut through everything else. Not the logistics, not the strategy, not the next step. Just you doing okay. She typed back, yeah, getting there. She put the phone down and looked at Carmen's yellow pad. At all the names, Sandra, Jerome, Priya, Gerald, Kara, 5 people who had been walking around with stones in their pockets for years and who had, in the space of 24 hours, started setting them down. And somewhere in Phoenix, in his office or his home or wherever, Ryan Mitchell had retreated to think about what had happened to the clean certainty of his Tuesday evening. He was learning something he should have learned a long time ago. The people you ignore don't disappear. They accumulate. And the woman you throw money at in a gas station parking lot might be driving home to make the kind of phone call that changes the calculation for every person who comes after her. Emily got up from this table and poured herself a glass of water. Wednesday was coming. Sandra would be there. Lisa's team would start reviewing materials. Carmen would keep building the framework. And whoever had sent that first text, there are more of us, would keep talking because that was what happened when the door finally opened. People came through it. The question now wasn't whether this would continue. It would. The question was how far it went. And Emily Hayes, who had driven home from a 12-hour warehouse shift 2 days ago and stopped for gas on a lonely stretch of highway outside Tucson, found herself sitting at her kitchen table in the middle of the afternoon with a list of names and a legal team and 23 people who had ridden to Phoenix and back for her thinking about the answer. It went as far as it needed to. That was the answer. All the way until every name on that list had been heard. All the way until the math changed permanently. All the way until a next woman standing alone at a gas pump in worn work clothes had somewhere in the back of her mind the knowledge that the world was not as indifferent as it looked. Because someone had proven it could be otherwise. Because someone had shown up. Her phone buzzed one more time, another unknown number. She looked at it for a moment, then she answered. Emily Hayes, she said. My name is a woman's voice, young, uncertain, the specific uncertainty of someone taking their first real breath after a long time of not being sure they were allowed to. You don't know me, but I heard what happened last night, and I think something similar happened to me with the same man, and I didn't know who to call. Someone gave me your number and said. She stopped, steadied herself. They said you show up. Emily closed her eyes for just a moment. Then she said, tell me your name. Her name was Melissa Torres. She was 27 years old. She had worked as a junior project coordinator for a mid-sized commercial construction firm in Tempe, Arizona, a company that had a development contract with Ryan Mitchell's real estate group 18 months ago. She had been on site for a walkthrough when Ryan had arrived unannounced, moved through the space with 2 of his associates, and stopped at a set of blueprint drawings she had been reviewing. He had looked at the drawings, looked at her, then turned to the senior project manager standing beside her and said in a completely conversational tone, as if she weren't standing right there, who gave the intern access to the structural plans? She was not an intern. She had a degree in construction management. She had been with the firm for 2 years. Her name was on the title block of those drawings. The project manager had said, uncomfortably, Melissa's a coordinator on the project. Ryan had said, right, make sure she's supervised. Then he'd walked away. Melissa had stood there for about 4 seconds. Then she'd gone to the site bathroom, which was not a pleasant place to go for any reason, and she had sat on a folding chair that someone had left near the utility sink, and she had stared at the wall and told herself it didn't matter, that it was one comment, that men like Ryan Mitchell said things like that without thinking about them, the way bullets don't think about what they go through. She had not said anything to HR. She had not told her supervisor. She had told one friend who said, that's awful, but what are you going to do? He's Ryan Mitchell. She had not done anything. And for 18 months, she had carried it the same way Jerome had carried the garage, the same way Kara had carried the ballroom, the same way Sandra had carried a recorded conversation she'd kept without knowing why. like a stone that was light enough to carry, but heavy enough that you noticed it every single day. Emily listened to all of this without interrupting once. When Melissa finished, there was a brief quiet. Then Emily said, "How did you hear about last night?" "My old project manager texted me this morning," Melissa said. He actually apologized. He said he should have said something when it happened. He said he'd heard what you did, and he wanted me to know he was sorry he stayed quiet." A pause. He'd never said a word about it in a year and a half, and this morning he texted an apology. Her voice was unsteady. "So I figured whoever Emily Hayes is, I needed to find her number." "I'm glad you did," Emily said. "What happens now?" Melissa asked. "I don't have documentation. I don't have a recording. I have a memory and a text from someone who feels guilty." "The text is something," Emily said. "A witness acknowledging what he saw that has value, and your memory is real, Melissa. It counts." She paused. "I'm going to give you a number. Her name is Carmen. She's helping coordinate everything, and she'll tell you what the next steps look like. But I want you to know before I do this is your choice. Nobody's going to push you further than you want to go. We're not running a campaign. We're just making sure nobody has to stand alone in it." Melissa stopped. "That's actually exactly what I needed to hear." Emily gave her Carmen's number. Hung up. Sat for a moment in the silence. Then she picked up her phone and called Michael. He answered on the second ring. "Hey." "Seven," she said. "Seven what?" "7 people now," Emily said. "Since last night, 7 people who experienced something at the hands of Ryan Mitchell and have been waiting for a reason to say something." She paused. "Michael, this is bigger than I knew. A lot bigger." A beat of quiet on his end. She could hear road noise. He was on his bike, pulled over somewhere by the sound of it, the engine idling low. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," she said, "but I'm starting to feel the weight of it. The responsibility. These are real people. Their stories are real. And if we're building something here, it has to actually help them. Not just feel like just in the moment." "It will," Michael said, "because you're not doing this for the feeling. You're doing it because it's right." A pause. "And because Lisa Mendez is now involved, and Lisa doesn't do things halfway. Carmen thinks Lisa's already decided to take it on." "Then it's real," Michael said simply. "It was already real. Now it has structure." She nodded, though he couldn't see it. "Come home when you can." 2 hours, he said. "Maybe less." She put the phone down. Carmen came back into the kitchen. At that point, she had stepped outside to take a call, and she looked at Emily's face and immediately said, "New one." "Melissa Torres," Emily said, 27, Tempe, 18 months ago, and her former project manager sent her an apology text this morning because he saw what we did and felt guilty for staying quiet." Carmen sat down. She wrote the name. "An apology from a witness," she said almost to herself. "That's corroboration even if he didn't intend it that way. A witness acknowledging culpability for silence is a witness acknowledging the event was real and significant." "You think Lisa can use it?" "I think Lisa's going to be very interested in our 7 people," Carmen said, "because 7 is not a bad day. 7 is a pattern that any jury could understand." Emily looked at the name on the legal pad. Melissa Torres, below Sandra Aller, below Jerome Williams, below Priya Nair, Gerald Hines, Kara Linwood, below Emily's own name, which Carmen had written at the top of the list 2 days ago, when this was still something simple enough to fit in a single kitchen conversation. "What does Ryan do when he finds out there are 7, Emily asked. Carmen's expression was careful. "He panics," she said, "or he doubles down. Those are usually the only 2 options for men who've operated this way for a long time. And panicking in his case probably means his attorneys get more aggressive, which means we need to be airtight before that happens." She tapped the pad. "Wednesday matters. Sandra brings the recording. We need everything consolidated and in Lisa's hands before Ryan's team has time to build a counter-narrative. And if he doubles down," Carmen met her eyes. "Then we're more ready than he is," she said, "because we have 7 people who are no longer alone, and he has attorneys who are billing by the hour and hoping he'll do what they say." She paused. "Men who've never been held accountable have one consistent weakness. They fundamentally don't believe the people they've hurt will actually follow through. They think at some point the path will get too hard and everyone will go home." She looked at Emily steadily. "They haven't met you." Emily almost laughed. Actually almost laughed for the first time in 2 days, which felt like breaking through something. "Okay," she said, "then let's make sure everything is ready for Wednesday." Wednesday arrived like a test that you've studied for but can't fully prepare for because it's the kind of test that has questions you couldn't anticipate. Sandra Aller drove in from Scottsdale in a dark green Honda Civic that she parked precisely in front of the chapter house at 9:45 a.m., 15 minutes early, which told Emily something about Sandra's character before she even opened the car door. She was mid-40s, compact with dark hair that was beginning to silver at the temples, and the kind of posture that came from years of holding yourself straight in rooms where people were looking for a reason to dismiss you. She carried a laptop bag over one shoulder and a manila folder under her arm. Emily met her at the door. They looked at each other for a moment, two women who had met on a phone call 3 days ago and were now standing on either side of a screen door that suddenly felt like a very small threshold between the before and the after. "You're shorter than I imagined," Sandra said. Emily blinked, then laughed. A real one surprised out of her. "I get that a lot." Sandra smiled tight at first, then something more genuine coming through. "I've been telling myself the whole drive down that this was a mistake," she said, "that I was being impulsive, that 4 years is too long and the recording probably won't hold up and I should have just stayed home and, Emily said. Sandra stopped. "And then I got off the interstate and I realized I've been telling myself some version of that for 4 years, and I'm really tired of it." She shifted the laptop bag on her shoulder. "So here I am." "Here you are," Emily said. "Come in." They sat in the living room. Michael brought coffee without being asked, set it on the table, and quietly removed himself to the back of the house, understanding, as he almost always did, exactly when his presence was needed and when it wasn't. Carmen was there with her legal pad. Rook was there because Rook was always there when information was being organized. And Lisa Mendez had joined by video call on Carmen's laptop. Professional, sharp-eyed, her dark hair pulled back a cup of coffee on the desk behind her that suggested she'd been working since before any of them had woken up. "Sandra," Lisa said when introductions were done, "before we listen to the recording, I want to hear it from you. Not summarized, not edited. What happened from the moment you walked into that meeting?" Sandra sat up straight. She set her coffee down. She looked at the laptop screen where Lisa's face waited calm and attentive. And then Sandra Aller, who had spent 4 years telling herself the story wasn't worth telling, told it. She told it with her hands folded in her lap and her voice even, and her eyes fixed on the middle distance in the way people look when they're accessing a memory that's been locked in a specific room for too long. She told it without crying, though at 2 points, Emily could see the effort that took. She told it completely. When she finished, Lisa said, "Thank you, now the recording." Sandra opened her laptop. Her hands were steady as she pulled up the audio file. 4 years old, an MP3 that had been transferred from an old phone to a new one to a laptop carried through upgrades and moves and all the ordinary migrations of a digital life preserved each time with the same wordless instinct that had made her hit record in the first place. She pressed play. The sound quality wasn't perfect. It was a phone in a bag, ambient noise underneath, but the voices were clear. Ryan Mitchell's voice was unmistakable. Even through the recording, it had that particular timbre of a man accustomed to rooms arranged around him. He said what Sandra had described, every word. And in the recording, the additional context was even worse. There was a laugh from one of his associates after the pay grade comment, and Ryan had added something Sandra hadn't fully relayed on the phone. "Let me know when you're ready to sit across the table from someone who can actually make decisions," said to the air, to his associate, not even to Sandra's face, as if she had already ceased to exist as a relevant entity in the room. Nobody in the living room spoke while it played. When it ended, the silence lasted about 5 full seconds. Then Lisa said very quietly, "Sandra, I need you to send that file to me directly. Encrypted. Carmen will give you the protocol." She paused. "I also need you to understand something. What's on that recording in the context of a business financing meeting, in combination with the pattern we are now documenting across multiple complainants, is not a small thing." She paused again. "I want to take this case." Sandra's breath caught audibly. "I want to be clear about what that means," Lisa continued. "This will not be fast. It will not be comfortable. Ryan Mitchell's attorneys will attempt to discredit you, minimize the context of the recording, and argue that isolated incidents don't constitute a pattern. We will argue that they do. We will have documentation corroborating witnesses and the testimony of 7 individuals who experienced similar treatment across a consistent time frame. A beat. They will settle before this reaches a courtroom. I have done this long enough to know that, but getting them to that point is work. I'm not afraid of work, Sandra said. Good, Lisa said. Neither am I. After the call ended, Sandra sat quietly for a moment. Then she looked at Emily. Is this what you expected when you took that photo of his license plate? She asked. Emily thought about it honestly. The gas station, the boots on the concrete, money fluttering down. The impulse to take the photo that she still couldn't fully explain except as some deep, inarticulate refusal to let the moment just disappear. No, she said. I just knew I didn't want to forget it. And now look, Sandra said softly. And now look, Emily agreed. That afternoon, Carmen consolidated everything into a single secure file and transferred it to Lisa's office. 7 accounts, 1 recording, 1 corroborating witness apology text from Melissa's former project manager. The photographs Emily had taken of Ryan's license plate, which were now largely symbolic, but which Carmen insisted on including because, as she put it, the origin matters. At 4:30, Carmen's phone rang. She looked at the screen, looked at Emily, said, It's Briggs. Thomas Briggs, Ryan's attorney. Emily nodded once. Carmen answered, Put it on speaker. Ms. Rodriguez, Briggs said. His voice was still professional, still measured, but there was something compressed underneath it now. Something that hadn't been there in his call with Emily 2 days ago. I'm following up on our earlier communication. My client has reviewed the situation and is prepared to enter into a good faith discussion about resolution. I appreciate that, Carmen said. As I mentioned, we now have 7 complainants in legal representation. Ms. Mendez's office will be your point of contact from here. I'll forward her details. A pause. 7 complainants, Briggs said. 7, Carmen confirmed. Another pause longer. Is Ms. Hayes available to? Ms. Hayes has directed all communication through counsel, Carmen said pleasantly, as have the other 6 individuals. You'll hear from Lisa Mendez's office by end of week. She hung up. She and Emily looked at each other across the table. He didn't know about the others, Emily said. No, Carmen said. He knew about last night. He knew about the restaurant. He thought this was one woman and her husband in a difficult evening. She leaned back. He just found out it's 7 people an attorney who has beaten firms like his before in a 4-year-old recording. Emily was quiet for a moment. How does Ryan take that? She asked. Carmen considered. He's going to be angry, she said. Not at you specifically, at the situation, at the fact that this exists at all. Men like Ryan Mitchell have a particular brand of outrage reserved for moments when the world stops behaving according to the rules they believe apply to them. She paused. And then when the anger runs its course, he's going to do what Briggs is paid to make him do. He's going to calculate. And the calculation, 7 people, documentation, an attorney, a recording versus the cost of a prolonged public legal battle that his investors will watch. Carmen folded her hands. He'll settle. The question is what he's willing to offer and what the group is willing to accept. I told Briggs on day 1 that I didn't want his money, Emily said. I know, Carmen said, but some of the others might need it, and money isn't the only form a settlement takes. She looked at Emily carefully. There's another option, one that Lisa will likely propose, a formal acknowledgement, a written admission of the pattern of behavior. Not buried in legal language, something clear. Emily felt something move through her, not satisfaction, something more significant than that. A real apology, she said, in writing, that the others can see. And potentially, Carmen said carefully, that's on record, not private, not sealed. She paused. That's a significant ask. He'll resist it. But if Lisa pushes and the evidence is as strong as it appears, he'll have to choose between fighting it publicly and admitting it on paper, Emily said. Yes, Carmen said. And fighting it publicly means the recording goes into evidence, which means it becomes discoverable, which means it becomes news, Emily said. It becomes news, Carmen confirmed. They sat with that for a moment. Then Emily said, the others need to know where this is going, all 7 of them. Before anything happens, before Lisa makes any moves, everyone in this group needs to understand the full picture and make their own choice. Carmen nodded immediately. I'll set up a call for tomorrow morning. Not a call, Emily said. I want them here in person. Sandra's already here. Jerome can drive down from the city. Cara, Priya, Gerald, Melissa, they're all within 2 hours. She looked at the table. This isn't something that should happen over a speakerphone. This is a conversation that needs faces. Carmen looked at her for a moment, then she wrote it down. That evening, Michael came home to find Emily on the back porch. She was sitting in the old wood chair that had been there since before either of them, looking out at the desert dark. A glass of water on the armrest, her boots off and her feet tucked under her. He came and sat on the step beside her without a word. They stayed quiet like that for a while. The stars were out. The desert at night had its own particular silence, not empty, but layered full of sounds that were distant enough to be texture rather than interruption. Sandra's staying at the Comfort Inn on Route 7, Emily said eventually. I know, I offered her the guest room. She said she needed her own space to think. Emily nodded. Smart woman. Very, Michael agreed, in another quiet stretch. Briggs called Carmen, Emily said. I heard. He'd been in the back of the house for part of that conversation. 7. He didn't expect 7. No, Michael said. He expected it to go away. People like him always expect the problem to go away. He looked at her sideways. What did you feel when she hung up on him? Emily thought about it. Tired, she said, and certain. Certain of what? That this is right, she said. That even with everything it is going to cost the time, the legal complexity, the stress, all of it, this is the right thing. For all 7 of us, and for whoever comes after. Michael nodded. He reached over and took her hand. Not dramatically. Just held it the way he had for 8 years, the way that had become as ordinary and as necessary as breathing. You know what I keep thinking about, he said. What? That parking lot, he said. The people who didn't say anything. He paused. I keep thinking that most of them went home and didn't think about it again. Ordinary people going home to ordinary evenings. And I don't blame them. That's how most of life works. Another pause. But there are probably a few of them who've thought about it every day since. Who told someone that night. Who wished they'd said something. Emily thought about the man at Pump 4. The woman who had gasped and looked away. Probably, she said. Those people, Michael said, are going to hear about what happened. Maybe not the legal part, maybe not the details. But the shape of it, woman alone at a gas station, someone decides she has no one standing beside her, turns out she does. He paused. That shape is going to reach some of those people, and they're going to carry it differently the next time. Emily looked at him. That's the math changing, she said. That's the math changing, and he said. They sat there on the back porch for another hour. The desert cooled around them. Somewhere off in the distance, a coyote called out once and went quiet. The stars moved imperceptibly across the sky the way they always had, indifferent to everything below, but present for all of it. Thursday morning, 6 people walked through the door of the chapter house. Sandra arrived first at 9 sharp. Then Jerome, who drove down from Phoenix with his wife Tanya, who had decided at the last minute that she was coming and nobody was going to tell her otherwise, and who walked in holding her husband's hand with the expression of a woman who had been carrying something alongside him for 2 years and was ready to put it down. Kara came next in a blazer, like she was going into a meeting that mattered, because that was what this was. Then Priya, who was quieter than Emily remembered from the phone, but whose eyes were completely clear and steady. Then Gerald, the oldest of all of them at 62, moving slowly but with the deliberate gravity of a man who had decided that this was worth whatever it cost his knees to be here. And last, Melissa Torres, 27, nervous but upright, in the door. Here. Emily stood in the middle of her own living room and looked at these 6 people who had come from different directions and different years and different versions of the same moment, and she felt something that she didn't have a perfect word for, not pride, that wasn't it. Something more like the specific weight of being trusted. The weight of standing at the center of something that mattered to people who had every reason to protect themselves and had chosen instead to show up. Michael made coffee. Tanya helped him without being asked because Tanya was that kind of person. Carmen sat up at the dining table with her laptop and her legal pad, and the efficiency of someone who understood that the administrative part of justice was not glamorous, but was every bit as important as the emotional part. And Lisa Mendez joined by video again, but this time she'd asked them to position the screen so she could see the group. She wanted to see all of them. Good morning, Lisa said. Thank you for making the drive. I know that wasn't easy for everyone. She looked at each face in turn, not quickly, actually looking. I'm going to tell you exactly where we are and exactly what our options are. No legal hedging, just the real picture. And then I want to hear from each of you because this decision belongs to all of you equally, including Emily. She started talking. She laid it out with the clarity and directness that Carmen had promised the recording, its legal standing, the pattern documented across 7 accounts. The corroborating witness, the morning call from Briggs that signaled Ryan Mitchell already understood the ground had shifted. She explained what a settlement could look like, and what litigation could look like, and what the realistic timeline for each was. She did not minimize anything. She did not overpromise. When she finished, she said, "Questions first. Then I want to hear what each of you needs." Jerome spoke first. "When you say public acknowledgement, what does that actually look like in real life, not legal language?" "It means a written statement," Lisa said. "Drafted by our team, reviewed by his team, signed by Ryan Mitchell, personally acknowledging the pattern of behavior. Not euphemisms, not corporate language. The actual behavior named." She paused. "It also means that statement is not sealed. It's on record. Accessible." "Accessible to who?" Priya asked. "Potentially anyone," Lisa said, "depending on how it's filed. At minimum, it's part of the legal record. At maximum, if he contests certain elements, it becomes discoverable in future proceedings, which means future attorneys can access it if he's ever in a similar situation again." Gerald made a sound, not quite a laugh. "Meaning if he does this to someone else?" "The pattern already exists on paper," Lisa confirmed. "It becomes significantly harder to dismiss." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Sandra said, "I've been sitting on that recording for 4 years because I was afraid nothing would happen. Because I thought I'd take it out and show it to someone, and they'd say, 'Well, he was rude, but that's not a crime,' and I'd have gone through all of it for nothing." She looked around at the other faces. "I'm not afraid of nothing anymore. I'm more afraid of not trying." She looked at the screen. "I'm in." "I'm in," Jerome said. Tanya squeezed his hand. "I'm in," Kara said, without hesitation. "In," Priya said quietly. Gerald nodded once. "In." Melissa, the youngest, the newest, the one who had called 3 days ago. Not even knowing if Emily would answer, she straightened in her chair. "I'm in," she said, "even without the documentation, even with just my memory and a text from a man who felt guilty. I'm in." They all looked at Emily. She looked back at them, at this room full of people who had driven from different directions to sit in her living room and say yes to something that was going to cost them time and energy, and the particular vulnerability of having your worst professional memory handled by strangers in suits. "Then we're all in," Emily said. Lisa nodded on the screen. "Good. I'll contact Briggs today. We'll have an initial position to him by Monday." She paused. "One more thing. Before I let you go, I want to say something that isn't legal advice." She looked at the group. "What you're doing is not ordinary. People who've been hurt by people with power don't usually come together like this. They usually stay separated because that's safer, or at least it feels safer. The fact that 7 of you are in the same room because one woman took a photograph of a license plate and refused to go home and pretend nothing happened is remarkable." She paused. "I've been doing this for 22 years. I know how many people make that kind of call and how many don't. I know the weight of what you're doing, and I want you to know I'll carry it carefully." Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Tanya, Jerome's wife, who hadn't been there for any of it except the most important part, said quietly from her chair in the corner, "Thank you, all of you." She looked at Emily specifically. "Thank you for calling him my husband." Emily felt her throat tighten. "He called himself," she said. "I just made sure the phone was on." After Lisa signed off and Carmen started walking people through the next practical steps, Emily slipped out to the back porch. Just for a moment, just to breathe outside the weight of the room. She stood there for less than a minute before she heard boots on the wooden step behind her. She didn't need to turn around. She knew the weight of his step. "How's the room?" Michael asked. "Full," Emily said, "and real." She paused. You should have seen their faces when Sandra played the recording. Not pleasure, not revenge, just relief. Like something had been proven that they'd started to doubt themselves about. Michael stood beside her. "That's what he wanted," he said. "Men like him, they don't just hurt you in the moment. They count on the fact that over time, you'll talk yourself out of the memory. Start wondering if it was really that bad. Start thinking maybe you misunderstood." He paused. "The recording takes that away. He can't make her doubt what she heard." Emily nodded. "Michael, yeah." She turned and looked at him directly. "What if it's not enough?" she said. What if we do all of this, we go through everything, and his lawyers find a way to bury it, and he pays some number and signs something that doesn't mean anything, and goes right back to Emily, Michael said. She stopped. Look at who's in that room, he said. She heard their voices through the screen door. Sandra asking Carmen something about the timeline. Jerome's low rumble of a laugh at something Tanya said. Kara and Melissa talking to each other, two women who had never met 72 hours ago, and were now building the particular quick intimacy of people who share the same specific wound. 7 people who came forward, Michael said. 7 people who have names and faces and stories that are on record now. Whatever happens legally, they did that. You helped them do that. He looked at her. That doesn't unhappen. Whatever Ryan Mitchell's attorneys do, they cannot make it unhappen. Emily listened to the voices inside. You're right, she said. Also, Michael said, and his voice shifted slightly. She caught it immediately, that particular shift that meant something was coming that she hadn't expected. I got a call this morning, she turned. From who? Reporter, he said. Phoenix Tribune, investigative desk. He met her eyes. Apparently someone who was in the Chandler room Tuesday night told someone who told someone. And now a reporter named Grace Park has been making calls since yesterday afternoon. Emily stared at him. She wants to talk to you, he said. The silence stretched for a full 5 seconds. Does Lisa know? Emily asked. I called her before everyone arrived this morning, Michael said. She said, and I'm quoting here, tell Emily not to say a word without me on the line, and also tell her this is exactly how it usually breaks open. Emily turned back to look at the desert, at the flat, wide distance of it, at the sky that went on past everything you could see. A reporter, the Tribune, someone in that restaurant room had talked. Not maliciously, she didn't feel malice in it, just the way significant things move from person to person, carried forward by the human need to say, did you hear what happened? Can you believe it? Believe it? Something changed last night. When does she want to talk? Emily asked. She said, whenever you're ready, Michael said. She's not going anywhere. Emily thought about Sandra's recording, about Jerome's written account, about Melissa's old project manager and his guilty text message, about 7 names on a legal pad, about Lisa Mendez's 22 years in her careful hands. She thought about a woman alone at a gas pump and money falling to the ground and 12 people who looked away. She thought about what Michael had said about the math changing. Tell her Friday, Emily said, after Lisa and I talk. Michael nodded. He started to go back inside. Michael, she said. He stopped. When all of this is done, she said, when it's over, whatever over looks like, I want to go back to that gas station. He looked at her. I need to go back, she said. I need to stand there and feel it differently. He nodded slowly, understanding it completely the way he understood most things about her, not by analysis, but by the same instinct that had made him ask that first night, did he think nobody was standing beside you? Okay, he said, and went inside. Emily stayed on the porch a moment longer. The desert held its silence. The voices inside her house rose and fell with the particular rhythm of people deciding together to stop being quiet. She breathed it in, then she went back inside. The Friday call with Grace Park lasted 47 minutes. Emily had Lisa on a separate line the whole time they'd agreed beforehand that Emily would speak freely, but that Lisa would text her if anything needed to stop. No text came, because Emily didn't need to be reined in. She just told the truth the same way she'd been telling it all week, in the same voice she'd used at the chapter house table and in the restaurant corridor and on the back porch in the dark. Straight through, no editorializing. Let the sequence make the argument. Grace Park was good at her job. Emily could tell within the first 3 minutes. She asked the right questions, not the flashy ones designed to produce quotable outrage, but the structural ones, the ones that built the picture from the ground up. When did you take the photograph? What made you take it? When did you decide to call the others? What did Ryan's face look like when he walked into that corridor and saw you standing there? Surprised, Emily said, and then something past surprised, like a man who just realized he'd been running a calculation on the wrong numbers for a long time. Grace was quiet for a moment. Then, did you feel satisfaction when you saw that? Emily thought about it honestly. No, she said. I felt something more like sadness, because the calculation should have been obvious. It should have been obvious to him every single time. And it wasn't. It kept not being obvious because nobody ever made it cost anything. And now, Grace asked, Now it costs something, Emily said. Whether that's enough, I don't know yet. Grace asked about the others. Emily directed her to Carmen for anything specific about the legal case, but she talked about the phone calls, the text, the drive from Scottsdale, the living room full of people on Thursday morning. Talked about Tanya Jerome's wife and what she'd said. She talked about Melissa's project manager and his guilty text. She talked about Sandra keeping a recording for 4 years without knowing why. That detail, Grace said, the recording, she kept it for 4 years. Yes. Why do you think she did that? Emily was quiet for a moment. Because when something is done to you and you can't fight back in the moment, sometimes you hold on to the evidence the way you hold on to a coin in your pocket when you're broke, she said. It doesn't spend, but it reminds you that what you lost was real, that you weren't imagining it, that the ground actually did shift under your feet. She paused. Sandra kept that recording so she'd know she wasn't crazy, so she could hold it in her hand in the dark and say, "This happened. I know this happened." Silence on the line. Then Grace Park said, "Emily, off the record for a moment, just between us. Okay, do you understand what this week has actually been, what you've started?" Emily looked out the window, at the gravel lot, at Michael's bike parked in the shade, at the ordinary, unchanging desert afternoon. "I took a photograph of a license plate," she said. "That's what I started." "And everything else?" Grace asked. "Everything else," Emily said, "was already there. I just made sure the door was open." The Tribune article ran on Sunday morning. Emily didn't read it first. Michael did at the kitchen table at 6 a.m. coffee, going beside him the same way he read everything completely, without rushing, giving it the full attention it earned or didn't. She came downstairs at 6:30 and he slid the tablet across the table without a word. She read it. Grace had written it with the same structural precision Emily had recognized in her questions. It started with the gas station, the money on the ground, the photograph. Then it moved outward, the restaurant, the 7, the recording, the pattern that stretched back years. It named Ryan Mitchell by name. It named the complainants who had agreed to be named, which was all of them except Melissa, who had decided she wasn't ready for that specific exposure and whom Emily had supported completely without question because this was always about choice. It quoted Lisa Mendez, careful, precise, the kind of legal language that managed to be entirely clear without overreaching. And it quoted Emily twice. Once about the calculation, once about the coin in the pocket. She read it twice, then she set the tablet down. "Well," she said. "Yeah," Michael said. Her phone started ringing at 7:15. "Carmen first, have you seen it?" She had. "Lisa's already gotten 3 calls from journalists. We're not commenting further until the legal process moves." "Good." Then Kara, whose voice had a particular quality to it. Not quite tears, not quite laughter, somewhere in between. "It's real," Kara said. "It's actually out there. It's real." Then Sandra, who said simply, 4 years. It took 4 years and 1 phone call from a stranger. Then Jerome, who didn't say much at all, just, "Thank you, Emily," in a voice so low and full she had to press the phone harder against her ear to catch it. By noon, the article had been shared several thousand times online. By 2 p.m., 2 of Ryan Mitchell's major investment partners had issued statements saying they were reviewing their relationship with his firm. By 4 p.m., Thomas Briggs called Carmen directly. His voice had lost the professional smoothness of 3 days ago. What was underneath it was not quite panic. Briggs was too experienced for panic, but something adjacent to it. The sound of a man whose client had just watched a situation become significantly larger than the one he'd been hired to manage. "My client is prepared to enter immediate settlement discussions," Briggs said. "We'll need to coordinate with all 7 complainants and their schedules," Carmen said. "Then we can have a preliminary call early next week." "My client would prefer this week," Briggs said. Carmen looked at Emily, who was sitting across the table. Emily shook her head. "Early next week," Carmen said pleasantly. "Thank you, Mr. Briggs." She hung up. They looked at each other. "He's scared," Emily said. "I was scared Thursday when we told him 7, Carmen said. "Now he's read a Tribune article that's been shared thousands of times, and he's watched 2 investment partners make public statements." She paused. "This is the moment where the leverage is real. Lisa needs to know." Emily was already dialing. Lisa answered on the first ring, which meant she'd been expecting the call. "Briggs called you," she said. 2 minutes ago," Carmen confirmed. "Wants to move fast. We said early next week." "Good," Lisa said. "Don't let him rush the timeline. Urgency favors us now, not him. Every day this stays in public conversation is another day his investors are watching. A pause. I want to make one thing clear before we walk into that room. The settlement offer will likely be financial. It will probably be substantial. And my professional advice is that every one of the seven has the right to accept what makes their own life whole again. But we go in having agreed on the non-negotiable, the written acknowledgement, the named unsealed on-record admission of the pattern. That does not get traded away for a number. If he wants this resolved quietly, the price of quiet is the truth on paper. He'll fight that, Carmen said. He'll try to, Lisa said. And then he'll do the math on fighting it publicly versus signing a document that already essentially exists in the form of that recording. She paused. Men who've operated without consequences have a breaking point. It's usually the moment when they calculate that the cost of denial exceeds the cost of admission. We're very close to that point. Emily said, and if he doesn't break, then we litigate, Lisa said, and Sandra's recording goes into evidence. And Grace Park writes a follow-up article about a man who chose to fight 7 people in court rather than admit what's already on tape. She paused. He'll break. She was right. The settlement meeting happened the following Wednesday, exactly 1 week after Sandra had walked through Emily's door with her laptop bag and her 4-year-old audio file. Lisa's office, Phoenix, a conference room that was deliberately professionally neutral. 8 people on Emily's side of the table, Lisa, Carmen, Emily, and 5 of the 7 complainants who had made the drive. Melissa by phone, Sandra beside Emily, her laptop closed in front of her. Jerome with Tanya again, because Tanya had made it clear she was not waiting in the car. Ryan Mitchell's side had Briggs and 2 other attorneys, and a man in his 50s who never introduced himself, but who had the specific posture of someone whose job was to observe and report back. Ryan himself sat at the end of the table. He looked different from the man in the restaurant corridor. Not smaller exactly, but less assembled. The silver hair was the same. The watch was the same. But the particular atmosphere he'd always carried, that quality of entering rooms, as if they'd been arranged for him, was absent. What was there instead was something more ordinary. A man sitting at a table because he had to be there, facing something he'd spent a long time believing he would never have to face. Ahmad eye contact with Emily when she sat down. She held it for a moment, then looked at Lisa because the moment belonged to the workout, not to her feelings about the man across the table. The meeting lasted 3 hours and 20 minutes. Emily would not remember most of the legal language. She would remember specific moments. She would remember Sandra's voice when Lisa played the first 10 seconds of the recording, not for the room but to establish its existence formally, in the way Ryan's jaw moved and then went still. She would remember Kara reading her prepared statement in a voice that had started shaking and steadied itself within the first paragraph and stayed steady through the end, and the way one of Ryan's attorneys looked at his notes rather than at Kara's face, and the way Ryan did not look away. She would remember Gerald saying at 62 years old in a voice that carried the particular dignity of a man who had waited a long time to say something out loud. I have spent 2 years wondering if I should have said something in that moment. I'm saying it now. Better late than never. She would remember Jerome's voice when he described the garage and Tanya's hand on the table beside his, and the way Jerome reached for it without looking down, just reaching, because it was there. And she would remember the moment 2 hours and 40 minutes in, after the figures had been discussed and the terms had been argued, and Briggs had pushed back on the acknowledgement language 3 separate times, and Lisa had not moved an inch when Ryan Mitchell spoke directly for the first time in the meeting. He said, "What do you actually want from me?" The question was addressed to Emily. Lisa started to speak. Emily put one hand up briefly, just a pause, just a second, and Lisa stopped. The room went quiet. Emily looked at Ryan Mitchell. "I want what I said in the corridor," she said. "I want you to have understood what you did, not legally, not for the paperwork." She paused. "I want it to have cost you something real enough that the next time you're standing in a parking lot and then there's a woman in work clothes whose card won't read, you think about this room, you think about these people." She looked around the table, Sandra, Kara, Jerome, Gerald, Priya. "You think about what it cost them to be here, and you make a different choice." Ryan was quiet. "That's it," he said, almost the same words as the corridor. "That's everything," Emily said. Another silence. Longer this time. Then Ryan Mitchell looked at his lead attorney. Something passed between them, not words, just a look, the kind of shorthand that develops between people who have had too many versions of the same conversation. Then he looked back at the table. "I'll sign the acknowledgement," he said. Briggs started to say something. "I'll sign it," Ryan said again. Quieter, but final. The room shifted. Not dramatically, these were people who had learned not to perform their emotions in professional settings. But something moved through everyone on Emily's side of the table. Sandra closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Jerome exhaled. Kara set her pen down. Lisa said, "We'll have the language finalized by end of day Thursday." Briggs nodded. Ryan was still looking at the table. Emily watched him. She was looking for something, she wasn't entirely sure what. Some sign of whether this was real, whether the man across the table was genuinely arriving at something, or whether this was just the final calculation, the last move in a game that had always been about managing outcomes. She didn't know. She couldn't know. Some things existed on the other side of what you could verify from the outside. What she knew was this: his name would be on a document. Clear language. The pattern named. 7 people's experiences acknowledged as real. On record. Permanent. Whatever happened inside Ryan Mitchell's understanding of himself, that was his to figure out. That was the part that no legal document could compel and no public article could produce and no woman at a gas station could manufacture by taking a photograph of a license plate. That part was his. She had done what she could do. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon that had no particular significance except that it was warm and clear, and she had the day off work, Emily drove out to the Desert Cross gas station on the west side of Tucson. She pulled in, parked at Pump 7. She sat in the blue pickup truck for a moment. Just sat, looked at the pump, at the concrete, at the ordinary, forgettable, unremarkable surface of a place where nothing much ever happened except the daily business of people needing fuel and moving on. She got out. She stood where she had stood 3 weeks ago. She looked at the ground. There was nothing there now. No money, no memory. You could see nothing that marked this square of concrete as different from any other. The world had covered it the way the world covers everything, with time and ordinary traffic and the accumulative weight of all the moments that came after. But she felt it. She felt the difference between the woman who had stood here then and the woman standing here now. Not because she was braver, not because she had become something she hadn't been, but because something that had been invisible was no longer invisible. Because a door that had been closed, not just for her, for all of them, was now open, and on the other side of it were 7 people who had been heard, and a document with a powerful man's name on it, saying he had done what he'd done, and a reporter's article that had already moved something in the way certain strangers treated other strangers in small public moments. And somewhere in some parking lot or office or ordinary Tuesday afternoon, some version of what might have happened at Pump 7 was going to go differently because of what had happened here. She couldn't prove that. She couldn't see it. But she believed it the way she believed the things that mattered most, not because she could verify them, but because the logic of them was undeniable. She heard boots on gravel. She didn't turn around. She knew the weight of his step. Michael came and stood beside her. He looked at the same pump, the same concrete, the same ordinary nothing of the place. "How does it feel?" he said. She thought about it for a real moment, the way she thought about things that deserved real answers. "Different," she said. "It feels different." He nodded. They stood there together for another minute. No one else in the lot was paying them any attention, which was how it should be, which was how it had always been, which was the whole point. 2 ordinary people at a gas station on an ordinary afternoon. Nothing about them announced itself. Nothing gave away what had happened here and what it had set in motion. And that was exactly right. Because the thing about real power, Ryan Mitchell had never understood the thing that men who measure themselves in square footage and investment portfolios and the size of the rooms they enter tend to fundamentally miss is that it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It exists in the quiet decision to show up. In the phone call made at 11 p.m. to a stranger who kept a recording for 4 years. In the convoy that rides clean through the Arizona night because what they're doing matters too much to do carelessly. In the woman who takes a photograph of a license plate and drives home with both hands on the wheel, not knowing yet what she's started, but knowing somewhere underneath the anger and the hurt and the ordinary exhaustion of a 12-hour shift, that this is not the kind of thing she's going to let disappear. Emily Hayes had stood at Pump 7 3 weeks ago and been made to feel invisible. She was not invisible. She had never been invisible. And now, because she had refused to accept the lie that she was alone, and because she had picked up the phone, and because 23 people had ridden through the desert dark, and 7 strangers had walked into a conference room, and 1 woman in Scottsdale had kept a file she almost deleted a dozen times now, the record was permanent. She filled her tank. She got back in her truck. She looked at Michael through the windshield and he looked back at her, and the look between them held everything that didn't need to be said. She pulled out of the Desert Cross gas station and drove home. And the ground she drove on was different than the ground she'd driven on before. Not because the road had changed, but because she had walked through what she'd walked through and come out the other side still herself, still whole, still the woman who showed up. That was the real victory. Not the document, not the article, not the investors who quietly rearranged their relationships with a man who could no longer pretend his behavior had no cost. The real victory was standing at Pump 7 one more time and feeling in your bones that you were never the powerless one. You were just the one they hadn't found yet.